retrouver pour ce dernier module, cette dernière masterclass donc de la 3e édition du Festival des musiques à l'image. Moi, il y a une phrase que j'aime beaucoup, c'est une phrase d'un grand cinéaste américain d'origine autrichienne qui s'appelle Billy Wilder, qui disait, il parlait du film Ben-Hur, et il disait Ben-Hur, c'est le genre de film qui démarre à 20h, et après 3 heures de projection, vous regardez votre montre, et il est 20h15. Je vois, ça vous fait pas rire finalement. Je suis pas déçu. Je vous dis ça parce que moi j'ai l'impression qu'on vit exactement la même situation, mais dans l'autre sens. C'est-à-dire que j'ai l'impression qu'on est encore à 14h, qu'on démarre la journée avec Michel Bernard, et, alors qu'il est déjà 18h30, 18h40, 43, et qu'on arrive au bout de cette journée, au terme de cette journée, mais ça va être un terme façon feu d'artifice, parce que, comme vous le savez, il y a un compositeur qui nous attend de l'autre côté de l'Atlantique, je dirais même sur la côte ouest des États-Unis. Il fait partie vraiment de cette constellation de compositeurs, avec notamment Alexandre Desplat, Marco Beltrami, qui ont vraiment renouvelé, décapé, apporté une fraîcheur au son d'Hollywood. C'est quelqu'un qui avait des passions dans la vie, la musique, le cinéma, la musique pour le cinéma, et qui a fait de ses passions son métier. Et puis il a cette chance aussi d'être accompagné et d'accompagner lui-même 2 cinéastes qui font partie de son propre aveu d'une génération peut-être vraiment des plus brillants raconteurs d'histoire du cinéma contemporain. Je pense bien sûr en particulier à J.J. Abrams et Brad Bird. Pour des raisons techniques, d'ailleurs je vous le dis tout de suite, mais cette conférence pour maximiser le temps de la conférence, de l'heure et demie qu'on va passer ensemble, on m'a demandé de l'animer en anglais, donc soyez indulgents si je me transforme en disciple de Nelson Montfort. Je voulais aussi vous dire qu'on s'est dit que cette fois-ci on allait peut-être, avant que la connexion se fasse, qu'on allait peut-être raconter, mais en raccourci, vraiment le parcours de notre invité. Et plutôt que de le faire avec des mots, je préférais qu'on le fasse vraiment avec des images, et encore plus avec de la musique. Donc regardez et surtout écoutez. Sur l'écran, devant vous, Michael. Wow.
Hello.
Hello. Do you see us?
Yes, I can see you better if I wear this.
But it's still Halloween.
No, Halloween was last night. Yeah, you're right. All right, we'll take it off. We'll take it off. That's fine.
I recognize you. No, okay. Michael, it's a real treat. It's a real treat to have you with us tonight. You're in LA, we are in Paris, but right now in front of you, you have 300 people, audience, just simply addicted to your writing. Vous pouvez dire à Michael à quel point vous l'aimez? Michael, you know...
I wish I was there, really, I do. But literally, before I even did this interview, I'm sitting here and I'm working on this movie called Inside Out, which is directed by Pete Docter, and he did Up, of course, and I think that you'll really like this movie. So I apologize for not being able to be there in person.
It's okay for this time. But... You know, this talk will be like a kind of free and sentimental walk into your career and films course. But first of all, I just wanted to ask you, how did your vocation for film music come about?
You know what? It all started as a kid watching movies. I mean, I loved movies so much, and films like Planet of the Apes, like the original Planet of the Apes, was one of my favorite movies of all time. And as a kid, I used to walk around the house like Cornelius the Ape, and hoping that one day I could be an ape. You know, that's how addicted to movies I was. And then, of course, when Star Wars came out, that was sort of the end. And that's the one, when I looked at it, I thought, that's what I want to do for a living. I want to make movies. Now, I didn't know that I wanted to write music at that point, although I loved music and I listened to soundtracks constantly, and classical music and jazz. But I couldn't, can you hear me still?
Yeah, very well.
Yep. Okay, great. So I loved all those things, and I was obsessed with film music, but I didn't know that that's what I would do. I was a terrible piano student. I hated practicing, and I was the worst. But it all started, you know, just as a kid, growing up, watching television and watching movies. I just loved it, and I just thought, I want to do that. I don't know how to do it, but I want to do that.
And you trained at the Juilliard School, and before scoring television series, you wrote music for video games, including The Lost World. What did you learn from that experience?
Actually, even before Juilliard, I went to film school. You know, when I since I was 9 years old, I was making movies, making my own Super 8 and 8mm movies. You know, I had a little studio down in my parents' basement, and I had a ping pong table, which I turned into an animation table. So I did all kinds of stop motion, and then I also used the kids in the neighborhoods, and we made lots of. So most of my childhood was me making movies, and then when I went to college, I went to a film school. I didn't go to a music school, and I was studying music sort of on the side for my own interest, because I was really fascinated by it, and I loved orchestration and instrumentation and all of those things. So I was doing that on the side outside of school, but in school I was studying film. And then when I graduated from film school, that's when I decided to get more serious about music. Because I found that, you know, one of the most fun parts of making a movie was putting the music in. You know, when you're making a movie, you have to rely on a bunch of people who may or may not show up to help you make this thing. Because, you know, movies are very hard to make by yourself. You need an entire crew of people. And I found it much more enjoyable just to sit in my room writing music than trying to wrangle a ton of people getting, you know, together. So I started studying music more and more, and that's kind of where I went. But I did start in video games. My first job in video games was given to me by someone you probably never heard of. His name is Steven Spielberg. But I know one day he's going to make a big movie, and you'll hear his name. It'll become a household name. But I was working at his company, DreamWorks, and they were doing a game based on The Lost World that he was directing at the time. And they asked if I could write some music for a meeting they were having with him to show him some stuff. And so I wrote some music, not thinking of anything, just did it. They used it in their meeting, and then he asked to see me afterwards. And I went down and talked to him, and he was very complimentary, and he really liked the music, and he was asking me, so you're going to do the whole game, and we're going to do this with a live orchestra, and that sort of started the whole ball rolling, and after that, it kind of never stopped. So, you know, there was a lot of little things that, you know, that led up to that, but it was really Steven who gave me my push into this whole world.
And were there any difference when you made the transition between you know, from video games to television, and then from television to motion pictures?
Yeah, I mean, I was scoring those video games as if I was scoring a movie. You know, I always looked at those things as miniature movies in their own right. So for me, it was almost like a training ground for what would become television and then movies. I treated all those video game characters the way you would treat any character in any movie or television show. So if you listen to those scores, they feel like they belong to a film that was made, but it's not the way, you know, that's just the approach I took, because I knew that's what I wanted to do. But no one would hire me in television. No one would hire me in film. They were like, you're a video game guy. You don't know how to do this. It's totally different. You know, you wouldn't understand. Just go back to your video games. So that was frustrating for a little while. But the transition into TVs, with TV shows with JJ, was almost seamless. It just felt like, it felt very natural, and it felt very fun. I loved doing it. And JJ, you know, he contacted me because he watched he played those video games that I was working on. And at the time, I'm working on these video games thinking to myself, how am I ever going to get a job in television if no one wants to hire me? How am I ever going to get a job in movies? You know, nobody wanted to hire me. But JJ just liked the video games, and he called me up out of the blue and said, hey, you want to work on this television show? So that's how we met. And And once again, it was JJ who kind of pushed me into the television world, you know, and then it just kind of went from there. And then the transition into movies was because Brad watched the television show that I worked on, you know, Alias. And so the lesson of all this is, you know, you sit there and you wonder, how am I going to get to this next level? How am I going to get to this next step? And you think it's going to be by way of sending out demo CDs or calling people or begging for work. And actually, it's really just from doing the best work you can and putting it out there. People will hear it, people will see it, and someone will respond to it in some way, and you just have to keep doing it. So
let's go back to 2004. C'est l'acte de naissance de Michael au cinéma. Regardez, écoutez. Watch. And?
It's weird watching that because I'm like, oh, I want to fix this. I guess I want to fix that. I should have done this.
But Michael, do you remember your first meeting with Brad Bird, and how did he communicate to you what he wanted for the film?
Oh yeah, Brad's a great communicator, first of all. I mean, so when some people, when you're working with them, and you're dealing with music, some people are like, well, maybe there should be French horns, and maybe there should be strings. Brad doesn't do any of that. Brad is all about just talking in storytelling. You know, I remember one time there's a scene where Dash gets his super suit. He sees that his mom has a super suit for him, and he's like, whoa, and he freaks out, right? And Brad said, this should feel like Christmas morning. You know, your parents are telling you, don't come downstairs yet, stay upstairs, we're not ready. And you know in your head there's Christmas presents all under the tree. And he goes, what does that feel like for a kid? And what does that sound like musically? He goes, that's how I want this to feel. And I remember, you know, thinking, wow, this is going to be a really fun person to work with, because he can really communicate in terms of storytelling as opposed to music, which is, music is storytelling, so there's no need to talk about instruments and how you're going to orchestrate and all of these things. It's more about just the feeling and the emotions. So the first time I met Brad was up at Pixar. So here I am up at Pixar. First of all, I couldn't even believe that I was there. I thought at any moment they would like realize who I was and throw me out of the building, because I had never done a movie before. I don't know what he saw in my music, but he wanted to meet me. So I went up there, and Brad and I got along instantly, because both of us are huge animation nerds. And we started talking about the Flintstones and Johnny Quest and composers like Hoyt Curtin, who worked on both of those shows. And I loved the music in those shows so much, and I loved Hoyt Curtin, and I loved the guys who were composing for television in those days. So Brad and I got in this very long, complicated conversation about animation and music and all of this stuff, and before we even started talking about The Incredibles. So it was pretty clear by the end of the meeting that this was somebody that I was going to get along with. This was somebody that was going to be really fun to work with. And so all my nervousness by the end of the meeting sort of kind of went away. But they didn't tell me that I had the job right away. I had to wait a long time before he finally called and said, okay, you have the job. You know, I was convinced, well, it was nice to go up there. I met Brad Bird, that's cool, because I loved Iron Giant. But nothing will come of this. And then he called me, actually, it was very funny. He called me and he says, all right, you got the job. And I was like, really? That's great, thanks. And he goes, now hold on. He goes, this is going to be the toughest job you've ever had. I was like, yeah, I understand that. I'm going to work hard and I'm do my best. And he goes, no. Your music could ruin my movie. I was like, well, that's certainly not my intention. And he said, no, let me explain. He said, if you and I aren't on the same page, and what I mean by the same page is the same storytelling page, every step of the way, the audience is going to start thinking things I don't want them to think. So let's just make sure you and I are in lockstep the whole process. And he was absolutely right about that. You know, I mean, it's very easily to send an audience down the wrong path with the wrong cue. And so, and he was very aware of that. And so it was a great experience for me working with Brad.
But was it difficult for you to write a score that was both modern and nostalgic? Was it hard to pay tribute to Mancini, John Barry, and at the same time to find your own personal way?
You know what? John Barry and Henry Mancini, and they're heroes to me. I grew up listening to them. I love them. So I looked at it as this incredible opportunity to write them a thank you note. You know, it's almost like that score for me was a thank you note to them, saying thank you for inspiring me, you know, when I was growing up, because that music, it was just, I remember my dad had this Peter Gunn album that he had gotten at the PX when he was in the Army, you know, years and years ago. And I still have this album, but it's the Peter Gunn album. I would listen to that thing over and over. I was so in love with it. And the well in the room, and that creates its own unique sound, which is the sound of an orchestra. And I loved that. I mean, I grew up with that. That's what I listened to. So when I hear things that have been recorded in isolated sessions where they would do strings over here and brass over there, and you know, it separate everything, and the players don't even know what's going on in the other parts of the orchestra, I always miss something. There's this soul that sort of gets ripped from it. And that's important to me, that it's there, you know, and because it's the soul of the player that gets injected into these little black notes that I'm writing down on paper. And without that, it just loses something. It's just not as interesting to me. I love the challenge of getting it right with everyone at the same time. You know, that's a really fun part of the job for me.
So the success of The Incredibles logically brought another great animated movie with Brad Bird. Et comme nous sommes à Paris, on ne pouvait pas rater un extrait de Ratatouille.
We'll find out, I guess, huh?
No, could you explain how you built the cue for that sequence, Wall Rat? You know, it starts with a single flute, strings, and the orchestration swells up as Remy climbs the wall and reaches the roofs.
Yeah, you know, it was interesting. Well, first of all, I remember after Ratatouille, after The Incredibles came out, a couple months later, I got a call from Brad, and Brad said, "Okay, I got our next project." And I said, "Great, what is it?" I was so excited, I couldn't wait to hear what he was going to do. And he goes, "All right, you ready?" He goes, "It's a movie about a rat who wants to cook." And I was like, "What? Seriously?" I was like, "Seriously? That's going to be our next movie?" I was like, "What?" And he goes, No, trust me, it's going to work. It's going to work." And he was right. But that particular cue was all about starting from a single idea, which then gets introduced to the idea that the world is a much, much bigger place than he had imagined it was. And so I thought, oh, it'd be fun to start with a single idea, a single flute, and little by little start peppering in the rest of the players. And as he's confined to these little passageways as he's making his way, I wanted to keep it small, but also very light and busy. And as he goes outside, you start to hear more strings come in, and as he goes up the pipe and then onto the roof, it gets bigger until you reveal the city, and it's huge, and it's like, this is the world that he always dreamed of. You know, the beginning of the cue is the world that he always lived in, and by the end, it was the world that he always dreamed of and hoped to be a part of. Which then quickly sort of shrinks back down again not long after that moment, to kind of put him back in his place for a little while before he then can figure out a way to become part of that world. So it's that was sort of the thinking behind it from my point of view.
So let's talk, if you wish, about J.J. Abrams. How did you first meet him, and what were your first impressions of him?
You know, when JJ, I was in this place where I was working on the video games, I was desperately trying to do something different. I wanted to do television so badly, and no one would hire me, as I said. And one day I got this email, and it said, "Hi, my name is J.J. Abrams. I co-created Felicity, and I did Armageddon, and I did Regarding Henry." And Regarding Henry, as soon as I saw that, I was like, "Wait, that had Harrison Ford in it. Is this person for real?" And I thought it was one of my friends joking with me. And he goes, "I really love your music. If you're interested, I would love to talk to you about working together." And he gave me his phone number, and that was it. So I called the number, and I thought for sure it would be one of my friends saying, "Ha ha, I got you." But it wasn't. It was JJ, and he said, "Hey, come on over to I'm making a show called Alias. I'd love to have you down so we can talk." And I went down to his office, and it was very surreal because that first meeting was down. They were just getting ready to shoot. They were going to be shooting in a couple days the pilot episode of Alias, and Jennifer Garner was there, and she was trying on different costumes, and JJ and I would talk, and then she would come in some crazy outfit, and then he'd give some comments about it, and then she'd go out, and then she'd come back in and a wig on and give comments. And so it was this very surreal thing. Now at the time, I didn't know really who Jennifer Garner was, but it was a really strange experience. But the thing about it was, JJ and I clicked in the same way that Brad and I clicked. We're both movie nerds. We both love music so much. And JJ is an incredible musician himself. And he had all this electronic stuff that he was like, and he was using a lot of the same samples that I was using. And we just had a lot to talk about. So much of the conversation became about just sort of this fun, geeky stuff that we both love. And then by the end, he's like, "Well, are you interested in giving this a shot?" And I was like, "Yeah, that would be amazing. Absolutely." And that's where it went. And then, it's funny because when you're working on a film or TV show, they have what you call spotting sessions. And it's where you sit with the director and you watch the film and you guys talk about where music is going to be. So I did my first one with him. We're watching the pilot. We're talking about it. And I was like, and it was just this real back and forth. "Oh, this should happen here and this should happen here." And I would like, "Yeah, and then this should come in here and we should do this here." And we did this. We got about 20 minutes into the hour-long show, and he was like, "All right, we don't need to do any more of this. You know what to do. Go ahead and do it." And we've never had a spotting session for the entire run of that show. And then the same thing on Lost as well. They would just send me the episodes, and I would do them, and part of the reason also is because making television is incredibly hard for anyone who's working on it, and especially for him at the time. Show running is incredibly difficult, and so no sooner do you get one episode out the door where you're then on to the next one, and you've got to get that one. So you have a lot to worry about. So I think it was a comforting thought to know that he could hand it off to me, and I wouldn't do anything crazy with it that he wouldn't like. We were very much on the same page, storytelling-wise.
But you say he's a musician, so does it make your collaboration easier or more difficult?
It makes it easier, actually, because he will have great ideas of his own, and he will have even just simple, like little thing. "Oh, what if we did sort of an arpeggio thing here?" Just simple little things. But JJ is a lot like Brad in that he really comes at it from the inside, from the character side, from the story side. And I think that's what makes this film so enjoyable and so you're able to connect with these characters, is because it's really always about the people in the movies and not about the movies that happen to have people in them. So many movies you see these days are more about the surroundings than they are about the characters. And that's what I love about what JJ brings to a movie, is he always tries to come at it from the heart of the characters. And that's how I feel about music as well.
But what was the musical challenge when he asked you to score Mission Impossible 3, his first feature?
Well, for me, the musical challenge was working with, I had done The Incredibles at that point, but no live-action movies. And I think working with Tom Cruise and Paula Wagner, who produced it, they were accustomed to working with guys that had done lots of movies, you know. So when JJ was like, oh, and I want Michael to come along, my friend Michael to come over and do this with me, I think they were kind of like, yeah, I don't think so. I think we're going to go another way. And to JJ's credit, he really fought to keep me there, and which you know, I owe him a lot for that. And it all turned out great. And in the end, I loved working with Tom and Paula. But the challenge for me was one of, first of all, the Mission Impossible, I loved that show. You know, when as a kid, I would watch that show and I loved it. And arguably, Lalo Schifrin wrote the greatest theme on the planet when he did that
5-4.
show. Yes, in 5-4. And Lalo is a genius. And to think that I was going to have to do something that supported this great work he did, that was terrifying to me, you know. And I remember thinking, how am I going to do this? What am I going to do? And I actually called up Lalo Schifrin and said, would you have lunch with me? I'm about to do this Mission Impossible movie, and I would love to talk to you. And he said, sure, which shocked me that he even wanted, you know, said sure. So I went to lunch with him, and he was amazing. I was really nervous. I was kind of like feeling like I was going to ask if I could marry his daughter. You know, that was the feeling I had. Because I just felt so like reverent to this theme that he had written. And I didn't want to do anything that would make him mad or upset. And I asked him, I was like, so I just want to know what do you think I should and shouldn't do with this theme? What should, you know, just give me some guidelines. What would you not like? What would you like? And he said, I just have fun with it. He goes, just go and have fun with it. And I was like, that's it? And he goes, yeah, that's it. Just have fun. You know, and I thought, wow, what an awesome guy. What an amazing person. I mean, because that's how I, in my heart, felt about it and how I feel about music in general. And to hear that come from someone who I admired so much was incredible. But it was such a great lunch, and I was, you know, and have since become friends with him. And just an amazing guy, and lucky I am to be able to use that theme.
But by the way, Michael, you know that we have a surprise for you.
Uh-oh.
You look worried.
Surprises. When someone says they have a surprise from you, they don't always turn out to be what you're hoping.
So let's say that a few days ago I spoke on the phone with a friend of mine, and when I told him that we had that talk today, he asked me just to record, you know, a few words for you as a kind of friendship message. Mm-hmm. So listen to this.
Okay.
Michael, this is Lalo Schifrin, and I want to express my respect and my admiration for your musicality and for your talent, and I want to congratulate you because you have this will and tenacity to keep going and extending the tradition of the Hollywood greatest composers. Once again, bravo and congratulations. Continue like this for a long time.
C'était
That is the greatest thing ever.
And
seriously, that is the greatest thing I've ever heard. I mean, when you think about it, you know, you grow up inspired by different people in your life, and the chances you get to meet them don't always happen. And when you get to meet someone like that, I mean, that's incredible. Thank you so much for that. He's an amazing guy. I told you, he's awesome.
No. Okay, but you know, because Lalo said to me that he still is very proud that, first of all, you included in your score, you know, his favorite Mission Impossible theme, the plot. And
the plot, which I loved, yes.
And
it's a great theme.
C'est génial de chanter de plot à distance comme ça, à des milliers de kilomètres d'intervalle. And you used also, you know, in many cues in your score, you have some irregular rhythms. 5/4, 5/8. That's a great idea. Does it come from, you know, the original theme? The idea come from the theme? From Mission Impossible?
Yeah, and I thought also, it just felt like the right thing to do, because the film was always about uncertainty. And the idea of using these different time signatures, you know, where everyone is so used to things in 4/4 or even 3/4, I just thought, wow, what a great opportunity to try strange things, you know. And I tried every possible time signature I could, just, you know, on every different cue, and it was, and it also just kept me on my toes and kept me experimenting and trying to do something new and different. And you're just making me feel like, wow, I should be doing more of that right now in the films I'm working on. But again, inspired by him and his writing. His writing is so interesting and so complex, and he never takes the easy way out. And I love that about him. And in his entire career, he's always done something interesting. And I try and can only hope that I can kind of follow that same path that he's on.
Wow. So, if you agree, we have a clip from Mission Impossible, and we just selected the Vatican scene, the beginning of the Vatican scene sequence. Okay? Mission Impossible 3, la séquence du Vatican.
Music, timing, and comedy. He was a genius, and talk about, you know, people you look up to. Jim Henson was one of my number ones. So.
Wow. So, Schifrin and Jim Henson, you know, two godfathers.
Yeah, you can't go wrong.
So, with J.J. Abrams, do you go beyond your composer's role? So, do you have your say in the editing, for instance?
Sometimes, if I feel like if I can have a few more seconds here, then I can hit this better. And I have a great relationship with the editors, and especially JJ's editors, Marianne Brandon and Mary Jo Markey. We've worked together since the beginning of Alias, so we're all really good friends, and they are free to call me and say, "Hey, Michael, I'm going to try something," or vice versa. I can call them and say the same, and we have this great relationship, and I love that because it does just make the process easier for both of us. Instead, you know, because when we run into a problem with a timing issue or something, we just call each other, and it's great.
Yeah. Because, you know, Abrams says that he says when Michael has difficulty scoring something, that means that there is a problem in the cut. Is it true?
Yes. Well, I don't know. I could be wrong just as much as anybody, but he does tend to look at any hiccups that I have. If I'm feeling like I'm having a hard time scoring this, he feels like there has to be something wrong. He said it shouldn't be hard to score. It should feel natural. And so he's always looking for me to tell him when it doesn't feel natural, when it doesn't. And that's just a great relationship to have with a director who is really open to listening to all the people he works with. It's really incredible to feel like you're really part of a team. You know, that Mission Impossible movie is really a reflection of JJ and how he and his team work together. It's really incredible. You know, it's like this, I feel like we are in some ways this little impossible mission force ourselves, you know, and everyone relies on each other. And it's not just a single person standing there, it's everyone together, and he's really great at making you feel that way too. It's a great experience.
There is a short documentary on you scoring a film produced by an iconic Hollywood director and producer. Et on peut en voir un extrait tout de suite, vous allez voir, vous allez reconnaître le film.
E.T. foolishly. This was the thing in the basket. Still here, still alive.
Still alive. And
yes, I made this.
And could you mimic the voice of E.T. also?
You know I could, but I would be too embarrassed.
No.
Here I am, someone who is wearing a stormtrooper helmet saying they're too embarrassed. Yes.
No, just a few words with mimic E.T., please.
Ouch.
Sorry.
That's okay.
No, okay. Well done. No. So, Michael, it's great because in that film we saw the family you have created around you with Tim Simonek, your orchestrator and conductor.
Yes.
And we saw Dan Wallin, living legend, who was your sound engineer for almost 12 years. And did your long time association work with Dan?
Dan is one of the great people that I've been able to had the privilege to meet in my life, and Dan has recorded over 500 scores in his time. 500 scores, and he has worked with everybody from John Williams to Lalo Schifrin. I mean, everybody that I admired, everyone whose music I loved, and I used to listen to those recordings. I remember listening to Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade as a kid, and just loving it and loving how it sounded, and I remember I had this opportunity to do a small film, and Tim Simonek, who I had become friends with at that time because we had done all the video games together, he said, there's this guy who's not working right now, and maybe he would do it. His name is, I said, well, who is it? And he goes, Dan Wallin. And I said, Dan Wallin? Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, Dan Wallin? Bullet, Dan Wallin? Accidental Tourist, Dan Wallin? I was just like running off all of his credits. And he was like, wait, you know him? I was like, yes, I've been listening to him. I said, there's no way he will do this. Why would he do this? He said, let's call him. So we called him, and he said, sure. And then I didn't let go of him until he retired just last year, and now he lives in Hawaii. He's having a great time. Dan Wallin is 87?
Yeah.
Now, 87 years old now, and I guarantee you, he could beat us up. He's in that good a shape.
Yeah.
He's an amazing guy.
But did he always record on 40-track tapes? I was flabbergasted when I saw that.
Oh yeah, we recorded.
Why?
Yes, we recorded the tapes. I did that as long as I could. I loved the sound of it. It sounded the most like the old school recordings that I loved, and I grew up with. And I went as far as Ratatouille. Ratatouille was the last one I recorded fully to tape. It got very expensive to do it. They weren't making as much tape anymore. And to do a film, you need 500 rolls of tape. And it's incredibly expensive to buy 500 rolls of tape. And you can't justify it to the studio when they're like, here's a $400 hard drive, why can't you just use that? So at first when we went digital, it wasn't, you could tell the difference, but it's getting to the point now where it's starting to sound really great, and I think the tools have developed to a point where, I'm happy with it. But I did love that idea of a mechanical thing sitting off to the side and three of them chained together and tape going around, and this poor guy having to go and change reels and re-put it, and everyone's waiting for him to do it. I mean, it felt like we were making movies in the 40s. I loved that. There was a great tangible feel to the whole thing. So, and I love that tactile part of filmmaking. Is why, if I weren't doing this, I would be a model maker for ILM, and if I were a model maker for ILM, I'd be out of a job right now because they just don't do that anymore. That part of filmmaking I love. I love the idea of building things and making things physically. So.
Yeah. So Michael, I would like to show a last clip, actually the last sequence of Super 8, and it's a key moment, but a very spectacular situation, but you have treated it with a very lyrical approach. Could you explain your intention of that sequence?
Yeah, it's an incredibly emotional story about this kid who loses his mother and has to figure out, in large part on his own, because his dad is so busy dealing with things, and he has no one there to kind of help him through these emotional issues he's dealing with. So he has to figure out, how do I come to terms with this loss, and how do I let go of this loss? And so the whole idea is, the film was built around these two themes, really. There's a little love theme between Elle Fanning and the boy, and then there's the family theme, which is the prominent theme. And So at the end of the film, we were joining these two stories together. You know, he sort of ends up having this relationship with this girl that is blossoming, and he's also at a point where he can sort of let go of this sadness and this loss of his mother. So I thought, well, it'll be interesting to try and marry those two ideas together and see what we can come up with, and but also to be simple and delicate when it needed to be, and let it grow to let it hopefully earn its grandness and its bigness. You know, it was a weird experience recording that because Steven Spielberg's standing right there. And, you know, I just remember I was trying to concentrate on the job, but I just kept thinking to myself, Steven Spielberg's right there. He's right there, you know? So like that 10-year-old boy side of me was very alert and awake that day, and was just like, I can't believe he's here. I better not mess this up. Please don't mess this up. So, but it was one of my favorite experiences that I've had so far, was working with him and JJ on that film.
And all in that specific sequence, all the sound effects and dialogues just vanish behind the score, the music.
Yeah, and that wasn't planned that way. I mean, that was one of those things that once we had all the elements together and we put it up, you kind of figure out what works best for you emotionally. And I think that in the end it felt, at least JJ felt like, you know, let's pull back on all that and let's just be about the emotion here, because, you know, and sound effects have their place, and I have great respect for the guys that do that work. I love it. And just again, as a film nerd, I just love that craft. But it's always a balance, right? You know, you can't put everything forward, because then really nothing resonates. So I think JJ was trying to figure out what would resonate the most here, and that's where we ended up. So.
Je vous propose donc, si vous êtes d'accord, qu'on regarde et qu'on écoute cette séquence magique de la fin. Don't cry.
Nah, it's, you know, did you cry?
Almost.
Then I didn't do my job well enough.
No, I was kidding, I cried. Michael, we're just going to ask for some questions in the audience. Est-ce qu'il y aurait donc des questions parmi vous pour Michael? Nous avons 2 micros qui circulent. Bonjour, Jean-Michel, tu vas devant la caméra.
Hello there.
Hello. Jean-Michel just opened, you know, this day of talks, you know, and he has a surprise for you. Est-ce que tu peux nous expliquer ce que tu as préparé, mon petit Jean-Michel?
It's a very little surprise. It's about a film you did for a very famous film. It's named The Glory Days. And I'm trying to do something special for you. Very special.
Oh, that's very sweet.
On encourage Jean-Michel. Vas-y. Pour la première fois au monde, du Jean-Michel Bernard qui joue du Michael Giacchino. C'est un moment intense.
exactly what I'm talking about, that idea of, art, inspiring more art and just putting beautiful things into the world, which you just did. Can I have a recording of that, actually?
Yes.
Is that possible? I would love. Do you have PayPal? I'll use that.
Of course.
Thank you so much for that. That was incredible. I don't know how to thank you. Thank you. That was beautiful.
Merci, vraiment. Je voudrais vraiment qu'on fasse une ovation, bien sûr pour Jean-Michel, qui a ouvert le cycle. Et merci à Michael de cette heure et demie de partage. On peut se lever si vous le souhaitez.